Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint Lauka Vai, Mother of Nightmares. If you like the channel and like to support us, our Ko-fi and Patreon page is a link below. Now on to the video. So this is the finished miniature that we'll have at the end of this tutorial. I don't cover the base or any of the basing parts to it, just the actual Lauka Vai model itself, the dragon and vampire lady bit. But the ruins you can paint however you like for them. So the first colour we're going to use is Citadel Deepkin Flesh. You can see here she's already had part of this, but it's quite a thin paint. And it does give you some pretty nasty streaking, so I decided that I would paint it up first with one layer and then come on and do the second layer for it so that you have that smooth layer at the end of it. So you want to get a nice smooth layer of this because it's for a skin. And once you've got that nice smooth layer, we can move on. We're going to paint her armour. We're going to use Citadel Xereus Purple. Just want to give this, again, a nice smooth layer of Xereus Purple to base it. It's quite cool and funky armour, this. It's very reminiscent of the Blood Knights. But I like that all the armour on these crazy vampires is slightly different colours, slightly different tones, so it does break them all up. They don't all look the same. They all do look pretty stunning. Really, really like this miniature. When it first came out, I wasn't too sure on how much I liked it, but after painting it, it does look absolutely superb. I'm really pleased with the results for it. So now I'm going to use Citadel Khorne Red. I'm going to use this to do the loincloth at the bottom here, and also the big spikes on the end of the wings. Could of course do these if you wanted to in Mephiston Red, but I'm going for a more subdued red, so using the Khorne Red. But if you're using Mephiston Red, then you'd want to go through the orangey reds for the highlights of those, make them a little bit brighter. So now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Retributor armour, just to do a few of the little golden pieces. Seems to have this scale mail hanging over each shoulder. It does have the details on the underside as well. Also painting some of the buckles and the decorations and stuff like that. We'll be getting Retributor armour too. Now we're going to go with Citadel Iron Hand Steel, but Lead Belcher or something similar will work too. I'm just using this to do the blade of the sword and all these little beads. Like so. Next up, Vallejo Chrome. We're going to be using this to do the grip and the little guard on the sword as well. Just so these are a little bit more shinier than the blade itself, make them stand out a little bit. Also going to paint one of the rings on her fingers with this too, because you've got 3 in total I think it is. So one's got the big red gem on, so I've done that one gold. I've done another one of the little bands gold, and I'm doing one of the bands with this colour too. Next is Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to be using this to do the little vial around her neck. There's also one around her waist and a little gemstone on her finger too. So I'm going to use this colour to do those. Very quick layer this one. I'm going to use Baneblade Brown to do all the leather straps and the kind of belts and stuff that's holding the armour plates on. So you'll see these around her waist here, and then she's got some higher up as well, and then you've got the crisscross across the back holding the breastplate on. Now we're going to use some Vallejo White, or whichever white you've got. We're going to use this to do the stripe in her hair, much like Lily Munster. Get that going around there. And down there's sort of like a couple little ridges of hair that go down to a point. So I just sort of followed those, use them as a little marker. It just makes it easier when you're tidying that up and finishing it a little bit later on. The final paint here is going to be Vallejo Black. We're going to use this just to touch up the fur which grows on the back of the legs there. Once you've got a nice smooth layer of this on, we can move on to the shades. Also onto a little kind of blending for the next part. Like so. So now I'm going to use Citadel Khorne Green Shade and Citadel Black Templar Contrast. If you look at the pictures of Lauka Vai, you'll see that where her hand becomes webbed initially, that's more of a kind of greenish colour, and towards the end of the wings are more of a black colour. So what I'm doing is I'm putting loads of Khorne Green Shade on the top of the wing here, and then we're just going to use a little bit of the Black Templar and mix that in and kind of blend that together. I'm also going to use the Khorne Green Shade on the whole of the skin as well, the rest of the skin for the miniature. Now we're going to use some Citadel Xereus shade, and this is going to go onto all of the gold. Retributor armour, get that dulled down, get all those details stand out with it. When you've finished all of the Xereus shade, we're then going to move on to Citadel Droochy Violet. We're going to paint all of the reds and also the purple armour with this. So just give it a nice coat. Same with the armour. I'll get the shade in there and get those details showing up. We're also doing the claws the same colour as the claws at the end of the wings. So you want to shade them too. So do them Khorne Red and then shade with the violet. Now we're going to be using Citadel Snakebite Leather Contrast to do all of the Baneblade brown straps. So get a good layer of this on so that you get the nice dark bit down the middle of the strap. Then we can start reapplying the colours. So now we're just returning to the skin. I'm going to be using Citadel Deepkin Flesh. What you want to be doing here is, because it is quite thin, it's quite handy for when you're working it into the edges of the recesses, because you want to keep that shade in the recesses. But because it's quite thin, you can get that almost looking as though you've blended it by sort of edging it towards where the shade is, so that you've got a thinner section where the shade is showing through. Then you can do another layer on the bits that are catching more light, a bit further away from those recesses, to give it that lighter and more solid Deepkin Flesh colour. So the next colour is going to be adding a little bit of Vallejo White to the Deepkin Flesh. I'm going to use this to start highlighting the skin. So if you think about where the light would be coming from and how it would land on the miniature, you're going to be highlighting those top edges and that kind of thing to make sure that the top of each ridge and detail is always going to be a little bit brighter than the area beneath. So like on these pectoral muscles here, you have the horizontal sort of striations going left to right, so you want the top of those striations, the crests of those muscle parts, highlighted more. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Black Templar and add this onto the miniature on the spine, just so that we can almost blend that in a little bit more, so that the black of the spine goes into the tail section too. Now, it does look like there's a couple of extra layers on the normal skin here. This is just keeping going with the Deepkin flesh and then the Deepkin flesh and white mix until you're happy with how the lighting is on it. That's only 2 layers that have gone on there, or 2 paint mixes anyway. Now what you might find is that you've got some areas where the coal green shade is a little bit thick and a little bit dark, so we're using some Citadel Apothecary White contrast just to dull down those darker shaded areas and lighten them up a little bit. So between the Deepkin flesh and the white mix, the coal green shade and the Apothecary White, you can actually get this skin looking really, really nice. Smooth out the darker areas and smooth out any sort of obvious joints between the shade and the skin. Get it looking pretty nice. Next we're going to be using a little bit of Vallejo German Grey, and this is going to be to do highlights on the wings. There's quite a lot of detail on these bits, sort of ridges, and then you've got the holes going through them and the sort of spiny bone bits of the fingers. So plenty to highlight on here and bring out the detail. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm going to use this to do highlights to the areas that we've just done with the German Grey, but this is just going to be proper edge highlights, so just really thin bits just to bring those details out and make them stand out nicely. You can see here when I'm doing some of those around the holes, the darkness that is behind it really does make those highlight edges show up with the Mechanicus Standard Grey. So it's a good one to use just to get them nice and bright. Now using Citadel Khorne Red, I'm going to start re-highlighting or recolouring the claws. So I'm doing a little bit at the end where it joins onto the sort of like the winged finger, and then doing more of the colour along each of the edges, and then towards the tip it's going to be more of a Khorne Red colour. And we can build up the layers and highlight that and get the ends looking a lot brighter than the base, and get those ridges down each claw highlighted too. Now using Citadel Wazdakka Red, I'm going to use this to do about 50% of the area that we did the Khorne Red. So in the areas where you've done the Khorne Red on those claws and the claws at the end of the wings, just do about half the area that's now in Khorne Red with Wazdakka Red. That'll give you a nice highlight on those areas. So you'll have the shade, the Khorne Red and the Wazdakka Red. Final highlight on these red sections is going to be Citadel Pink Horror. This is going to be again like an edge highlight, like we did with the Mechanicus Standard Grey. So you're just going to be going along these ridges that run the length of the claw and doing mainly the front and the back end of it, but doing some in the middle too will really bring out those highlights. You can use this on the claws on the feet too. So I was looking at the wings and how nice it looked with the highlights on the black parts of the wings. So I thought if we use Citadel Nihilak Oxide, and we can then highlight all these ridges and details on the turquoisey part of the ring and get those standing out too, and that'll mean that all the details really show up on the top and bottom parts of the wing. Now we're going to be using a little bit of Vallejo Red Wash. I'm just going to use this to go around the eyes and also the mouth, on the lips, on the mouth, I should say, not just around the mouth. And the red wash around the eyes is sort of like, gives them that kind of sunken and red and sort of like tired eyes kind of look. And once we put the whites of the eyes in there, that'll make the red stand out nicely between the white and the pale blue of the skin. So using Vallejo White now, We're just going to take the brush and go from the nose to the outside. Find that the best way to do the eyes is doing it side to side rather than trying to just put a blob in or do it up and down. It's always easy to pull the brush away from the nose just because it means you've got a clearer line of sight and a clearer run with the brush. You don't have to go over the nose and risk putting a little blob of white on that. Now I'm going to start working on the armour. That's quite a long process. You might want to cut some of these bits out if you want to, but I'm going to reapply the Xereus purple onto each of the plates just to get the colour back on those and leave the Droochy violet shade in there. So that'll be in the recesses, and then you've got the Xereus purple building up the colour on the raised sections of the armour too. Next we're going to use some of the Genestealer purple from Citadel, doing bits of highlights on these. I can see here that the armour does look far too bright and far too purple for me. I wanted it more of a, almost having like a crimson hue to it. So once you've done these highlights, we're going to put another shade over the top. Another two shades over the top rather. So the first shade that we're going to put over the top is Citadel Nuln Oil. Now I start kind of putting this on just into the recesses and onto the Xereus purple areas. If you just want to start putting this over the whole armour plate, you don't want a thick layer of this, just a thin layer, just to darken that down ever so slightly. You don't want it pooling too much or anything like that. It is literally just to go over and kind of wet that purple with a bit of Nuln Oil, and that will make it slightly darker, so that we have that not so vibrant purple going on. It will look just like a very, very dark purple. And next we're going to use some Citadel Khorne Crimson. We're going to paint all of the armour plates with this. Start doing it just in certain areas, like leaving the Xereus purple, but I go on to just completely paint all of the armour with the Khorne Crimson. What that does is you can see the highlights and the shades of purple underneath the crimson, because you don't want to put this on too thick either. Do like what you did with the Nuln Oil, and you're just putting a very, very thin layer on, and that will just give it that crimson colour and let the highlights show through. So you can see here, you can see where the Genestealer purple was earlier on, and now we're just going to reapply some smaller highlights using Genestealer purple, so that you have all those shades showing through. The final highlight for the armour is going to be Citadel Pink Horror, and this is going to be to pick out some lines, some details. You're not going to be going too wild with this or painting up a large area with it. It is literally just a few little edge highlights and a few little spots of light on it, just to give it that final highlight, and then you'll have that nice deep crimsony purple armour plating. Now back to the gold. I'm going to use Citadel Retributor armour. I'm going to start reapplying the colour back to all of the gold sections. Now you want to leave all that shade in the recesses because it gives you that nice, dark, moody kind of gold. I'm using a small layer brush from Citadel here. I'm just picking out all of these details on the armour. So you don't want to be going all over, you want to leave the shade in the recesses. And just picking out the nice parts. We're going to be applying a highlight now, and this is going to be Citadel Liberator Gold. This is going to cover about 50% of the area we've just put the Retributor armour on. So think about where the light is going to hit that gold, and you want to put the highlights in those areas. Just give it that nice shine. You'll have that nice dark shade in the recesses and the nice highlights on top. The final highlight on the gold is going to be a little bit of Vallejo Modeler Chrome mixed with the Liberator Gold. I'm mainly going to be picking out small spots for this. So on those little bits of the scale mail over the shoulders, you're going to be just doing little spots of light at the tip of each of those little scales, and then picking out the details on sort of like the piece of armour in the middle and the buckles and things, just picking out edges where the light had catch them just to give them that extra shiny highlight. Now we're going to use some pure Modeler Chrome, and you're going to use this just to paint the little spots on these chains, just to make them stand out a little bit more. We're also going to reapply it to the grip and the guard of the sword too. Now we're just going to go around all of the fur on the back of the legs, and we're going to give this a nice coat of black, touch it up where we might have got other colours on there. Now most of this is off screen, which is quite frustrating. What's more frustrating is the next layer to it is missing. So once you've put the black on, you want to use some Vallejo German Grey, like we highlighted the wings earlier on, and use a little bit of German Grey just to highlight the fur on the back of the legs. And we're just going to leave it with the black and German Grey on there. So we're going to the little blood vials now. I'm going to use Citadel Mephiston Red again. I'm just going to add a little bit of a lighter colour to each of these red sections. There's not much of them, but basically trying to make it look like there's a little bit of blood in there or something. They're incredibly small, you can't really tell anyway. So a little tiny bit of Evil Sunz Scarlet next to do a little bit of a highlight on the Mephiston Red. We are also going to use a little bit of Citadel Wild Rider Red and just do a final little highlight on them. Like so. Then we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo White, and we are going to use this to do little spots of light on those little vials as though they're reflecting light a little bit. You can do two little spots on the ring as well, the gem on the ring. And with them done, we're just going to touch up the fangs. With the white on the fangs, that is the final part of the painting for this miniature. So this is the finished Lauka Vai. I'm absolutely made up with how it turned out. Been dreading painting it for ages because I didn't want to mess it up, but I'm quite pleased with that result. So expect some more Soulblight Gravelords in the near future. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing and follow the social media link below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content, please consider supporting me on Ko-fi or Patreon, as it does help me keep creating content. Thanks very much.